Hello and welcome to the Gurobi Optimization Webinar, Stress Testing Algorithms, Solvers, and Models via Instance Space Analysis. My name is Lindsay Montanari and I lead the academic program for Gurobi. Before we kick off, I want to share a couple of notes. First, to ensure the very best viewing experience, please take a moment to click on the gear icon in the bottom right of the presentation screen and click on 1080p. We're going to be running through some formulations and figures in this presentation, so selecting high resolution will create a better viewing experience for you. Next, we want all participants to feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation using the Ask a Question tab below the presentation. We can see them coming in as you share them, and we're going to try to respond to all questions in the final 10 minutes or so of the presentation. In addition to our speaker, we're also joined by two members of our technical team, Simran and Steve, who will be available to help with questions at the end of the webinar. Finally, feel free to rate the talk and add comments at the end of the session today. We'd love to hear your thoughts about other topics you'd be interested in learning with us. Now, I want to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Professor Kate Smith-Miles. Professor Smith-Miles is a leading Australian mathematician, and she's Pro-Vice Chancellor at the University of Melbourne, where she holds the Melbourne Laureate Professorship in Applied Mathematics. She directs the ARC Training Centre, Optima, and is internationally recognized for her contributions to optimization, neural networks, and data mining. With over 300 publications and numerous awards, including an AO in 2024 in the King's Birthday Honors, she is the creator of the Matilda benchmarking tool, and she's a dedicated mentor and advocate for women in STEM. Now over to Kate to run us through this exciting topic.
My name is Kate Smith-Miles, and it's my great pleasure to be here today presenting to you about our instance space analysis methodology and how you can use it to stress test not only algorithms, but also solvers and models. So today I thought we would have an introduction to the methodology and look at a couple of case studies. One, testing algorithms, in this case heuristics for the timetabling problem, but also how you use it for testing models and solvers by looking at our bin packing recently published paper. And then I'll try to provide an overview of the other problems that we've solved and the online tools where you can see more use of instance space analysis. I'll point you to where you can find the latest methodology, the paper published in 2023, and also some video resources where you can get more information about how to actually perform your own instance space analysis. So I'll start by telling you that what we're really trying to do is attach a warning label to an algorithm. And this warning label cautions when you should use an algorithm, when you can expect good performance from an algorithm. But when I say algorithm, you could also substitute that word for model or even parameters, how an algorithm is configured. We have choices of which algorithm we use, how we choose to model, how we choose to set parameters within an algorithm. And there's no one size fits all. So this approach is really trying to understand the terms and conditions under which a given choice is guaranteed to be reliable. And for me as a mathematician, those terms and conditions, that's a mathematical challenge. The choice of test examples is really critical. If you want people to trust that your algorithm is good, then it's really important that you provide a comprehensive and diverse set of test examples to demonstrate that performance. So it's very easy to take an algorithm or a solver and throw some test examples at it and show that it gets good performance, converges really fast, or, has a very small gap to optimality. You might have to search quite hard to find an example where the algorithm or solver fails. But, we always encourage people to do that because we have to test the boundaries. We have to understand the weakness of algorithms, and every algorithm does have weaknesses. And the no free lunch theorem supports that. Likewise, the attempt to shine a positive light on an algorithm is always there. We don't like to publish negative results, and academia has its pressures. So it's very easy for people to choose to make an algorithm or solver look good if they want to. But we have a responsibility a societal responsibility to have trustworthy research, and that includes our obligation to actually try to expose where an algorithm or solver may have some weakness. And it's not the end of the world if it has a weakness. It's just about knowing when to use it and what are those terms and conditions. You might have another algorithm or solver that at first appears to be not so great, but that's an opportunity to really define those weaknesses, to understand them, and maybe that gives you some insights that you can use to actually strengthen that algorithm or solver when you can actually see what its weaknesses are. So, I really am trying to encourage people to search for the most diverse and comprehensive test instances, not just download the instances that everybody uses from the website, and to question where those test examples came from and why you're choosing to use them to demonstrate the strengths and weaknesses of your algorithm or model. So I think trustworthy test examples have to have certain properties. They should be unbiased, they should be diverse, they should be challenging of different algorithms. We don't want a whole bunch of instances that are just super easy for every solver. We don't learn anything from studying those. They should be discriminating. They should help you see, oh, this instance, this solver worked really well and this one didn't, or something that you can learn. And they should be real world like if we're trying to deploy these algorithms or solvers in the real world. And if we don't have these properties, the results at best are just inconclusive. We actually don't know enough about how the algorithm or model or parameter choices are going to stand up when we start to encounter varied real world conditions. So I think I began this journey about 20 years ago when I was an editor for a journal. And every week I would get submissions from academics around the world who had developed some new algorithm for a problem, and they had tested it, and they had a table of results in their paper. It's a very standard practice. And it was showing some instances, not really saying why they chose those ones, but here's my 10 or 15 instances, and here's my column of how my algorithm performs on average, across those instances. And here's somebody else's algorithm, and my algorithm is 0.001% better, so please publish my paper. And that narrative was so common, but I was always left feeling like, I don't know why you chose those instances, and are there other instances you could have chosen that would have had a different narrative? So this is standard research practice. We see it over and over again. And because other papers did that approach, then these authors do that approach as well. So the motivation for instance-based analysis really came from challenging standard research practice. This idea of reporting an algorithm's performance on average across some set of chosen test instances, and then saying the algorithm is competitive if its on average performance is better than the rest. I didn't find that very convincing. So the first concern is which test instances were chosen and why. Were they hand-selected, cherry-picked? Weaknesses are very rarely reported. People don't want to include poor performance in their table, so you can imagine that they might have encountered some and just thrown it out and chosen not to include that in the paper. The common benchmarks that people use for certain problems, TSP-lib or graph coloring benchmarks and various things. It's important that we see how the algorithm performs on those, but is that enough? Are those still fit for purpose? Are they biased when we look at where they came from? Typically the initial set of instances were proposed by researchers whose algorithm could solve them. So we do have to question and challenge and look at these benchmarks and how they should be evolving over time. So I'm saying test instances should ideally have these properties: demonstrably diverse, lacking bias, sufficiently challenging, discriminating of different algorithms. So we see some interesting differences in performance, and they should span a range of real-world contexts if you plan to use them for real-world deployment. The second concern with standard practice is on the other side. It's the looking at the algorithm behavior and just averaging performance. It's not nuanced enough. Just because an algorithm is best on average doesn't mean it doesn't have weaknesses. The no free lunch theorems, suggest that every algorithm has some weaknesses on average. If you really comprehensively have the most diverse space, they probably all average out to be quite similar. Some have strengths, some have weaknesses in different parts of the space. I'll talk about the space in a minute. What we really want to understand is how the characteristics of different types of instances are affecting algorithm behavior. And what are the conditions under which we expect one algorithm to be better than others? And what are the properties of those instances that give that algorithm an opportunity to show what it can do? Each algorithm works in a different way, and if the instance has characteristics that enable the algorithm to exploit that, then it will be competitive or outperform the others. But if the instance doesn't lend itself to how the algorithm actually works, then you can't expect a superior performance. So we're suggesting that algorithm performance shouldn't be just reported on average across a bunch of instances that you don't really know why you chose them. It should be reported based on instance properties, those terms and conditions, trying to understand this algorithm is expected to perform well for instances that have the following characteristics. That's where we're trying to get to. So the standard practice of algorithm testing, I would say, just is too many black boxes. Not only is the algorithm often a black box, but we've got some choice of test examples that we don't really well define. They're just a list of file names on your computer. We're not really scrutinizing them enough. So, that's a black box as well, the suite of test examples. And over on the algorithm performance side, some kind of measure of trust, average performance, gap to optimality, whatever it is. When we're just averaging that across all the test instances, that's also a bit of a black box. There's not enough opportunity to crack it open and see what's inside. And people have been complaining the way we test algorithms in operations research field for a long time. John Hooker, back in 1994 and 5, had a couple of papers that were really talking about we need to rethink the way we are testing heuristics in particular. But there have been a lot of concerns expressed. So the first problem we have is, how do we actually scrutinize these test examples and make sure that they're sufficient and trustworthy? How do we crack open that suite of test examples, more than file names, and see what kind of properties they have and ask, are they diverse? Are they discriminating? Are they biased in any way? The second problem is this averaging business. It hides all sorts of sins. Just because an algorithm is good on average doesn't mean it's good always, and we need to move away from just averaging and start to actually scrutinize performance for different types of instances. So I'm going to present to you a methodology for how we can do this, instance-based analysis, and we have an online tool called Matilda that helps people do this. And there's a big library of problems where people have already tackled the problem to understand strengths and weaknesses of different algorithms and models. And so Matilda will crack open the suite of test examples to help you see it, to visualize the bias, the diversity, the bounds within which instances can lie, and to see whether or not our test suites are adequate. Maybe there's great big holes in the space where we have no knowledge of how an algorithm is performing because we're not actually collecting instances that live there. So we'll see that. Matilda on the algorithm side is also going to help us visualize the strengths and weaknesses of algorithms across the boundaries of the whole space. So that's where we're heading. Of course, it's not just John Hooker that's been criticising standard practice. There's been others. And really, it's no one's fault that actually this standard practice still continues to this day, this reporting of average performance across some unscrutinised test suites. Right now, there are papers being accepted that have this standard methodology. We haven't had the methodologies and tools to help people do it any other way. So that's the motivation for instance-based analysis in Matilda, and it's starting to change. Increasingly, it's not just papers coming out of my group that are using instance-based analysis, but there's other groups around the world that have been using it, and increasingly journal editors are suggesting it. So that's a pleasing development. So the goals of instance-based analysis then have been to understand and visualize the strengths and weaknesses of algorithms initially, but it generalizes to models or parameter configurations as well. But I'll keep using the word algorithm, but you know that I mean the broader set of design choices that we have when we're solving optimization problems. So Which algorithm should be used when and why is what we're trying to address. We're trying to facilitate a more objective assessment of the power of an algorithm across the whole space, not in just cherry-picked examples. We're trying to improve research practice by offering that methodology, establish algorithmic trust. 20 years ago, people weren't talking so much about trust, but now it's a hot topic, of course. Society is demanding AI, that we have guarantees, and we can trust the outputs. And that, of course, that comes down to how well we're testing. And of course, we're trying to avoid deployment disasters by making sure that we're choosing the right algorithm for the right conditions. Instance-based analysis also has this other opportunity to help enrich the test instances, the benchmarks that people use in certain research fields, by generating new test instances with controllable characteristics, if we recognise that we're deficient in some way with our test suites. So we're expanding existing benchmarks to be fit for purpose. And once you have new instances, you see new behaviours from algorithms, and it can drive further insights and ideas for new algorithms as well. So there have been a number of research challenges along the way, this 20 years, starting with how do we actually measure those properties of instances, the features of instances that will help us understand the strengths and weaknesses of algorithms. People in operations research started recognising that which meta-heuristic is performing best on which instance of a particular problem is really hard to see the relationship. And yet, questions like this had already been answered in the meta-learning community. So with machine learning, people had been learning about learning algorithms for a long time. And I thought we need to start learning about optimization algorithms as well. So I had this paper published some time ago where I just saw an opportunity for us to take some meta-learning ideas and think about how we would apply them in an optimization context. But it comes down to how you measure the features of different optimization problems. What makes an optimization problem hard? And there's some generic things, number of variables, number of constraints, etc., and properties of those. But there's also a lot of problem-specific features. Traveling salesman problem, it's properties of the distance matrix, or graph coloring, it might be properties of the spectral features of the adjacency matrix. There's problem-specific features that you can think about. How do we visualize this instance space, this space of all possible instances, and how do we see where we have instances? Those will be points in the space where we actually have instances that we have tested. We have empirical evidence of how algorithms perform. But what is the boundary of what is possible for an instance to be? And where do we have gaps in that space where we need new instances? How do we, within this space, visualize the strengths and weaknesses of algorithms? We can do this quantitatively. So we define the region in the space where an algorithm has evidence of good performance. We've got enough points where we can see the algorithms performing well that we can kind of connect the dots, and a convex hull kind of argument, and create what we call footprints, is an area of expected good performance. We can learn machine learning techniques, we can learn to generalize that boundary and say, we have enough confidence that all the points within this boundary should have good performance as well, because the instances are quite similar. And qualitatively, we can gain insights into strengths and weaknesses by exploring how certain features vary across the space, and look at correlations with algorithm performance metrics. We can also look at gaps in the space to see whether or not we need new instances in certain areas, and also to look at the diversity and how easy or hard the instances are. If the instance space is filled with easy instances, we're not really challenging algorithms. So we can see all of that, and then we can figure out how we can create new instances that fill gaps in that space. And we have a methodology using genetic algorithms that helps us evolve instances to live anywhere in the space we need them to enrich the diversity. And finally, we can use all of this to support automated algorithm selection, and even new algorithm design insights to generate new algorithms as well. So those are the challenges of things we've had to develop over the last 15 to 20 years to be able to have the complete methodology that I'm about to present. So the framework within which we do an instance space analysis is presented here. It's a bit of a complex diagram, but in the middle is some very old work from John Rice in 1976 that we build upon. It's the algorithm selection problem. Suppose I've got a set of problem instances on my computer. They're just a list of file names, tsplib or something. I can measure some features of those instances. I've got a set of algorithms and I can measure the performance of those algorithms on those instances. And what I'm trying to do with the algorithm selection problem is pick the winner. Basically, I'm trying to say for a given instance, learn the relationship here, learn this mapping. John Rice did it with a regression model. But given some a feature vector of an instance, learn to predict which algorithm will perform best, right? So that's some very old work. And then I thought, well, this is a good foundation for what the questions that I'm asking, but I'm not trying to pick the winner. I'm trying to get insights into algorithm strengths and weaknesses. And I'm also trying to get an idea of this broader instance space, not just the set of instances I have on the computer, but this broader problem space, hypothetical instances that we haven't even got yet. I want to understand how an algorithm may perform in parts of the space that we haven't tested, or to figure out where we actually need to generate new instances. So for me, it's all about this broader problem space, the instance space, and the ability to understand how algorithms perform right across that space based on the statistical evidence that we have from the experimental results that we've got. So it's all about using this data, this metadata, and these spaces, the instance, the set of instances, the features, the performance metric of the algorithms, IFYA, IFYA, that's our metadata. I like to say, because I'm Australian, if you don't like it, you can change it. If you find that you've got some metadata and you're not actually learning very much, you can change it. You can add new instances. You can consider different algorithms. You could change your performance metric. You can think of new features that different algorithms. You could to discriminate better between the similarities and differences of your instances. So this is not a static process. Often you start with a collection of experimental data that you've done. You've run some algorithms on some instances and you've measured some initial features and you try to learn some stuff. And if you don't find that you're learning very much, you can iterate again. You can see in the instance space where you might generate new instances and you can create new features and things like that. So it's an iterative process. So the methodology then, before you start, you collect your metadata, your instances, features, and algorithm performance metrics. And then there's 5 main steps to create an instance space. First is there's some automated feature selection and dimensionality reduction that happens behind the scenes. You don't need to worry about doing that yourself. The instance space analysis methodology and tools do that for you. But then it gives you a 2-dimensional map with a mathematically defined boundary, and all the points in the space are instances where you have empirical evidence of performance. You can then study that 2-dimensional space. You can look at the diversity within the theoretical boundary. You can visualize algorithm performance, those footprints, to understand strengths, weaknesses, and also the uniqueness of different algorithms. Is your new algorithm having a footprint in a different part of the space to another algorithm, or does your algorithm just have the same footprint as another one, in which case it's probably quite similar in the way it works? We have a lot of different algorithms called interesting things, but sometimes the way they search the space is actually similar to existing algorithms. So establishing uniqueness is important for, particularly publishing innovative work. We can try to understand strengths and weaknesses by looking at feature distributions across the footprints and try to establish those terms and conditions under which each footprint exists. We can use machine learning to automate algorithm selection. We can get some insights after all this analysis of the instance space. Possibly we might think of new features that give us improved separation between good and bad performance. Insights into where we might need new instances to fill the gaps, and insights into new ideas for algorithms that have bigger footprints. And we repeat. After all those insights, we have new metadata now, and we can go through maybe another time before we kind of reach convergence. And convergence just means that there are no more gaps to fill in the space. We have a comprehensive set of instances, and compared to last time, the same features have been selected to best represent the instance space. So there's no more changes at that point. So that's the methodology, and I would like to quickly go through a case study of how we apply it. So university timetabling is a very familiar problem to most academics. And so to make more concrete then the methodology, suppose I have two algorithms, algorithm A and B, and I have 8,199 test instances of timetabling problems. And I'm measuring performance of algorithm A and B based on which algorithm has the smallest number of student clashes on average. So if I said to you that algorithm A wins 25% of the time, it has the smallest number of clashes for 25% of the instances. Algorithm B wins on 29% of the instances, and the two algorithms are tied 45% of the time. The question is, if you were a university administrator purchasing university timetabling software, which one would you purchase? Which algorithm do you trust more? They're both very good. I mean, they give similar results for 45% of the instances. 8,199 instances is a large number, so you're probably feeling like it's been well tested. And algorithm B has a slight edge, so you'd probably go with algorithm B. But I would encourage the purchaser to think and ask the questions, well, how many of those 8,199 test examples are like my instance? And which algorithm is best for my instances in my part of the instance space? So we need to see the whole space of instances. We need to see where you are and whose footprint lies there. So Matilda will help us crack open these 8,199 instances and see what they're like. And it will help reveal strengths and weaknesses of the two algorithms. And even though one is better on average, it's not best everywhere. So more detail now. The two algorithms are actually both winners of the International Timetabling Competition in 2007. So they're both very good algorithms. Some are slightly better on some instances, some are slightly better on the others, but they're both very competitive. The 8,199 instances come from three sources. 21 of them are real-world instances from an Italian university that were provided as part of the competition. Over 4,000 of them are randomly generated instances from a published timetabling instance generator from Edmund Burke's team in the UK. And 3,686 are real-world-like instances that we developed based on taking the Burke generator and using machine learning to change the parameters to learn to produce more instances like the Italian university instances, real-world. So if you're interested in that paper, it's published in Operations Research in 2013. But I think it was my first attempt to generate new instances with controllable characteristics by learning the differences between randomly generated instances and real-world instances, and then learning how to tweak a generator to produce what I wanted. So a little bit more detail now. Where is simulated annealing best? Where is taboo search best for which types of instances? But these are defining instances based on where they came from. And what I would say is it's more interesting to look at the properties of those instances rather than the label of their source. We could have instances that are almost identical that came from two different places. We're actually more interested in what the properties of the instances are rather than who created them. So this doesn't really help us very much. We see that taboo search is slightly better for random instances, and that the real world like instances are a little bit better suited to simulate annealing, but it's not particularly insightful to look at this. So let's do instance-based analysis on this. And here's a spoiler alert. Both algorithms do have weaknesses, even the one that's based on average. So let's go through the 5 steps of the creating the instance space. So to create this instance space, there's some feature selection that happens, a bit of correlation analysis to see which features are kind of predictive of performance, and some clustering to reduce redundancies in the feature set. We then solve an optimization problem to select the optimal dimensionality reduction, the projection matrix, to go from a high dimensional feature space of the selected features to a 2D mapping. So the details are in this 2018 paper published in Machine Learning. In the appendix, I think we have the details of the projection algorithm. But for the timetabling case study, let me just say that we started out with 32 initial features, just a brainstorming idea of what makes timetabling hard. You know, the number of students, the number of lecture theatres, but also properties of the underlying graph colouring problem. So if you know timetabling, you know that you can represent it as a graph colouring problem where the nodes are classes that have to be scheduled, and the colours represent the period, the time that's available. And you can't have the same colour for two classes that have a reason that they can't occur at the same time, such as the same teacher can't be in two places at once, or the students have enrolled in both. So there's an underlying graph colouring problem, and of course that means we can measure features of the graph as well. So a lot of spectral properties of the graph, algebraic connectivity and things like that. So the Matilda tool took 32 initial features and selected 5 of them as most informative of the similarities and differences between instances and how the two algorithms will perform. We define good performance as which of the two algorithms had the better, as in smaller number of student clashes, better performance. So here's an example of the projection matrix. We're mapping from a 5-dimensional space from the selected features to a 2-dimensional plane, the instance space. And the numbers in this linear transformation matrix have been worked out by solving this optimization problem. We're trying to achieve the projection that gives us the most linear trends across the space, so our eyes can see the directions of hardness, how algorithm performance might go from good to bad. And also we want to see linear trends in how the features change across that space, small values of features to large value of features, as linear as possible so that we can see directions and trends and correlations. So this projection matrix has been worked out to encourage that kind of linear trend across the space so we can interpret it more easily. And you'll see what I mean in a minute about those linear trends. So we do the mapping and we get a 2-dimensional instance space that looks like this. So Z1, Z2 are my coordinates from the 2-dimensional projection. The red boundary is a mathematically defined boundary within which all timetabling problem instances can theoretically lie. It's derived by looking at the features that were selected, those 5 features, and considering the upper and lower bounds of each feature. And then that creates a bounding box in the 5-dimensional space, and then the vertices of the bounding box we just project to the 2D using the same projection algorithm. So that's how we get the red boundary. It's not theoretically possible for an instance to lie outside this boundary. That would mean it has feature values that are impossible outside the bounds. Inside the instance space, we see our 8,199 timetabling instances. The blue ones are the Italian university real-world instances. They're all quite similar to each other because the university's timetabling problem doesn't change very much from semester to semester unless there's something dramatic that happens, like some lecture theatres are closed for renovation or something. The pink ones are the ones that came from the random generator. Randomly generated instances are usually in the middle of the space. They don't have extreme properties, extreme features. The yellow ones are the ones, remember I mentioned about the using machine learning to figure out how to parameterize the generator so that it produces instances that are a bit more like the blue ones. So you can see that we have pushed towards the real world part of the space, or at least the real world part of the space where the Italian university lives. Other real world university instances may have completely different properties because all universities are very different in how they structure curriculum or the resources that they have. So I'm not saying this is the real world corner, but this is the real world University of Udine corner. And so we did manage to push instances in that direction from the random generator. You can then look at this and you can say, okay, do I have enough instances here that I think I have an unbiased set, that I've got enough diversity? Are there more parts of the space that I'd like to explore? And yes, you can see there's a large region right up to the boundary that we have no evidence of how either of these algorithms perform. So we have opportunities here to enrich the instance space with new instances. But now we can see it. 8,199 sounded like a very large number, but clearly there's opportunities to gain more insights with different instances. Are we oversampling in certain parts of the space? There seems to be a lot of density over here and it's quite sparse out where the real world instances are. So machine learning in this space is going to struggle in the sparse regions. It doesn't have enough evidence to draw conclusions. So we have to think about that as well. That was just the instances and where they came from. But now let's have a look at the algorithm performance. Our two heuristics. We can ask, in which regions does each algorithm perform well or poorly? Remember, I've got that definition of good performance, meaning you were best. You had the smallest number of clashes. So we can see that simulate annealing is on the left and taboo search is on the right. And blue means good performance and orange means bad performance. So remember, taboo search was best on average, but it's got a very clear region of orange where it's not best. It's at the top part of the space. Because it's very hard as humans for us to see, colours on top of each other, this is where we can bring in the power of machine learning to kind of figure out what's going on here, consider all the densities and various things. So we can use machine learning to clean this up a bit for our eyes and just say, what is the expected performance given all of that data? And what we see is simulate annealing is predicted to perform best in the top and the bottom part of the space. And taboo search is predicted to perform best in the middle and the bottom part of the space, but not the top, right? So if I'm a university purchaser of timetabling software, I would want to know exactly where do I land? What are the features of my instance? And when I use the projection algorithm to land in a Z1, Z2 coordinate, where do I land and whose footprint am I in? Because that's the software that I should purchase. So we can also look at these footprints and ask how large they are, how unique they are. So we can see in the bottom part of the space, both algorithms perform well. Those are kind of easier instances there. But there's discrimination in the middle and the top part of the space where you want to carefully choose. Taboo search footprint is larger in terms of area. It's 65% of the space as opposed to 58% of the space when I add up the two blue regions here. The support vector machine that was used to learn the footprints is reasonably accurate, 89% accurate. We can always improve this by thinking of different features. But based on those 5 features, that's the performance. Now, those real-world instances from Italy, if I was an administrator at the University of Udine, I wouldn't be feeling confident about either of these instances because I'm in the top right corner and both support vector machines have said, oh, I don't think I'm going to be best. Now, remember, they had quite tied performance on those instances. And so there's no strong conclusion you can draw about who will be best, but these are actually both very good algorithms, so you could probably use either. And we can look at uniqueness of these footprints and recognise that clearly that top region is something that we want to understand a little bit better. So then we go to step 4, where we're trying to explain these strengths and weaknesses. We know taboo search has a weakness in the top part of the space, but why? So if we now look at each of our 5 features that were selected, and we look at the distribution of those features across the space, and here we can see that, for instance, Slack is the ratio of the number of seats available to the number of seats you need to schedule all your classes. We can see that for instances that have a very high value of Slack in yellow, they are in the top part of the space where taboo search is struggling. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because probably no one's particularly interested in timetabling. It's just an illustrative example to see how you can inspect the distribution of features across the space to get insights into certain regions that you've found interesting because you can see certain algorithm strengths or weaknesses there. So, yeah, we might also decide that we don't have the right features and that we're seeing some instances where they clearly have, they're quite close to each other in the space. So the features are suggesting that they're similar, but the algorithm performance is very different, that's a warning sign that you need to look carefully at those two instances and say what is actually different about them, and I need to now measure that. That's a new feature idea. Finally, we can put all this together and we can do automated algorithm selection and get an answer to which algorithm should be used in which part of the space. So we would conclude that you should use simulated annealing in the top where taboo search has a weakness. You should use taboo search everywhere else because it had the better support vector machine accuracy, so we trust it more. And there's a region in here where we don't have enough information and we can't make a recommendation. That would be maybe a suggestion to generate more instances that live in that part of the space. Okay, so those are the steps. When you do an instance-based analysis and you want to know, is this any good? Did I learn anything? I always look at this. So if I had just used simulated annealing everywhere, I would have chosen the best algorithm 70.6% of the time. If I just used taboo search everywhere, because it's the best on average, I would have chosen the best algorithm 74.4% of the time. But if I listen to the instance space analysis and the automated algorithm selection and pick the algorithm that it tells me to, I would have chosen the best algorithm 83.9% of the time. So that's what I always look to when my students do an instance space analysis. I always look to those numbers to see whether or not this was beneficial. Did we learn anything? Okay. As I said, it's an iterative process. We don't just stop there. We think of new feature ideas, maybe more instance classes. We want to fill the space. There were gaps there. Different algorithms, and often this goes on over several years as we keep learning more and more. And so we did that I did that with some collaborators in Vienna and University of Udine. And this is an expanded instance space where you can see the coloured instances are the ones, the 8,199 we had before, but the grey instances in the background are brand new instances that we generated to get more insights. And we also have different solvers as well as heuristics. So that was published in the Journal of Scheduling. Okay, so I want to very briefly now jump from talking about algorithms to models and solvers. So I've said right from the very beginning that when I say algorithms, it could be substituted with an idea of making decisions about how to model and also choice of solver. So this was the first paper we had published last year where we're actually using instance-based analysis to look at the strengths and weaknesses of different models for 2D bin packing in collaboration with Tony at Catholic University Leuven in Belgium, where my student Kelvin Chang Lu is a joint PhD student between KU Leuven and University of Melbourne. So we use instance-based analysis to compare MIP models. We have 4 different MIP models from the literature for bin packing. The performance metric is the time taken by a MIP solver Cplex, but we did also compare to Gurobi, and I'll present those results soon, to the time taken to obtain proven optimality. That's our performance metric, the time to prove optimality. So here's the initial instance space when we just use the benchmark instances that are out there in the literature, bin packing instances. A number of features were selected. I won't go into the details of what they are. You can look at the paper if you work in bin packing and are interested, but we get our 2D projection, and these are the existing instances, our mathematically defined boundary within which all 2D bin packing instances can lie, and the 2 types of instances that are in the literature. So that's the instance space on our first iteration. We can then look at the performance of the 4 different models across that instance space. So we have 4 different models by Chen, Pissinger, Bloom, and Castro. And the Chen one is quite powerful across the instances. It has best performance 59% of the time. So we can study the performance of the different models, and we have an algorithm selected down here that tells you which model is likely to be best. I should just say these 4 models, refer to the paper if you're interested, but it all starts with how they define a decision variable and the dimensionality of that decision variable in terms of indices and the consequential impacts on what the constraints are and And so they're of different dimensionality in terms of number of decision variables and constraints and tightness of formulation. But we're interested in whether the actual instance, the characteristics of the items that are being packed has an interplay with the modelling choices. No one size fits all. If you've got diverse instances, maybe a tighter formulation doesn't always work for some instances. But we decided we needed more instances because they were all just in the middle and not filling the boundary. And so we set target points. So at this point, I want to just quickly talk about the idea of evolving instances. We can use genetic algorithms to evolve an instance. Bin packing is just a string of items where you know their weights and you know the capacity of the bin. And so it's a question of you can evolve the string of the items with their dimensionality, or you could evolve the parameters of a generator. So there are existing bin packing generators, and you could evolve the parameters of those. Those are two things you can control. So we set target points here as across the space, and we try to evolve an instance that has a feature vector that, when you project it to the 2D, lives at our target spot. And so we managed to get either by using a genetic algorithm to evolve an individual instance, a set of items, or evolve parameters of the generator. We get all these new instances right around the edge there. And interestingly, when you expand the instance space, we now see that it's not just Chen that's best on those. It gives an opportunity for other models to show what they can do. So by generating more diverse instances, we slightly change our conclusions because we're now giving all the models an opportunity to show whether they have a strength. We get a slightly different conclusion. Now we're giving more instances in there where, the Castro model, 77% of the time, it was best for some of the ones that we generated, which was actually better than Chen's. Okay, so I guess the message is you might draw some conclusions based on your initial set of instances. Change the set of instances to fill the space, and sometimes the conclusions change, and it's really worth doing that. It's about robustness of our conclusions. What about impact of solver choice? In the paper, we also compare Gurobi, and this is interesting. For many of the instances, we had 804 instances. For many of them, within the time limit, both of them proved optimality, or neither of them did. But there were a handful of instances where, depending on the model, one solved and the other didn't. Only a small number, but that's worth more investigation. That's worth looking and saying, okay, why, when I apply this model to this particular, set of 28 instances, did Cplex solve and Gurobi didn't? And likewise, there's another set of instances over here, 20 instances where Gurobi solved and Cplex didn't. What is it about the way these solvers are searching the space, or how they're configured, that means that for those 20 instances, Cplex couldn't solve and Gurobi did? That's worth looking at. We didn't look at that in the paper. Just briefly, I want to show how we've also used it for testing branch and bound strategies using SKIP, just to try to get some insights into MIP solver performance. I won't go into the details because I think I'm running out of time, but we looked at many features of MIPS, various things from the variable constraint graph, as well as, obviously the left side and right side of the constraints and various things. So we selected some features, and we can look at the performance of strong branching and pseudo-cost branching, and decide for which kinds of instances different branching strategies are important. This was joint work with Simon Bowley, who works for Gurobi in Australia, and was my former PhD student. So that's just to give you an idea of instance space and how you can apply it to get insights into strengths and weaknesses of algorithms and models and solvers. Matilda is our online tool. where you can see how instance-based analysis has been applied to a wide range of problems. It also is where you can get more information about downloading our MATLAB code and access to the online Matilda tool to run instance-based analysis online. You'll find library problems there in optimization, as well as machine learning, time series forecasting, and software testing. It's been applied to a lot of problems. You can download the benchmark instances that we generate when we create an instance space and we fill it. We're sharing those instances as well. These are some of the optimization problems that we've studied. The ones in grey are coming. The final methodology is in the ACM Computing Surveys paper, and I'm noticing some instance-based analysis that is not on Matilda yet, including this recent paper on using it to test autonomous vehicles, trying to understand the terms and conditions under which different autonomous vehicle algorithms are to be trusted. So it's really exciting to see some of these new application areas. If you go to Matilda, you'll also find an instructional video from my partner in crime here, Mario Andres Munoz, who's been working with me for many years on instance-based analysis and wrote all the MATLAB code. And he takes you through how to use it with a live script. I should say he uses a case study from machine learning to illustrate the methodology based on our machine learning paper there. So we in Australia have been developing instance-based analysis, mostly using MATLAB, but now also moving to Python. Meanwhile, I've got Brazilian colleagues who have already been doing some Python implementations, and we've been working with them to expand that. So Matilda user accounts have been created from people right around the world. We'd be very happy to approve more if you want to take a look. It's open source for academic purposes, and we do enter into contract research with commercial partners. So I would just like to acknowledge the Australian Research Council, who's funded my work for many years, and all my students and collaborators. And special thanks to Andres and Nilafar for helping build the tools. And I'm very happy to stop there and take questions.
Thank you for joining us today, and a special thank you to Professor Smith-Miles for this engaging webinar topic. Now we have some time left for Q&A. I'm going to turn things over to Kate and members of our technical team, Simran and Steve, to guide us through audience questions.
Hello, hey everyone. Cool. Thank you so much, Kate, for that talk, and thanks everyone in the audience for joining and for asking questions. I see Kate's been replying as we've gone.
I've tried.
Few questions that we want to ask. Lindsay, is there anything you want to say at the top, or can we launch straight into it?
Just launch right into the questions. Feel free. We have about 10 minutes, so I'll let you know when we have just a couple minutes left.
Thanks so much. Really great question from Menkes in the audience, is asking about how solvers could have parameters that can be tuned. So I guess the question is, Kate, has there been any research about kind of, instead of doing it solver versus solver, doing it solver with different parameters and then mapping instances in that? Have you thought about that, or has any work gone into that?
Yeah, we've definitely thought about that. In fact, we have 2 PhD students at the moment, jointly between University of Melbourne and Manchester in the UK, both on that topic, working with Julia Handel and Manuel Ibanez Lopez over in Manchester on solver configuration and auto parameter tuning. So it's definitely something where we can see instance space. You can imagine an instance space and also a configuration space, and trying to map alignment between them. So you basically say, for instances like this, which set of configurations are best suited, but also streaming, like when you're dealing with problems where you've got a live stream of data coming in, being able to reconfigure an algorithm's parameters real time when you recognize that the features of the instance are changing as well. So we've got a couple of students looking at that, and we've already published a couple of papers on that topic this year, I think.
Makes sense.
it's a great question and a huge opportunity, I think. Look, back in the old days, I don't know how many years ago, but AMPL, you know, some of us learned mathematical programming using AMPL back in the day. And there was a similar approach or an idea. Dr. AMPL was supposed to be almost like a help desk to help you tune and configure AMPL, based on some very simple ideas of learning about if you've got this many variables, this many constraints, how should you set certain parameters within the solver. Things have advanced a bit more now. We look at much more sophisticated constraints of mathematical programming problems and symmetries and all sorts of things that you know about.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kate, for the amazing talk. We have a question from Eli in the audience, and they want to know, how does the instance space analysis relate to the statistical design of experiments? Are they complementary approaches?
Yeah, I'd say complementary. I'd also say a little different in the sense that statistical design of experiments, obviously you're maybe aiming for a space-filling design, but what is that space? Often you know certain characteristics of people, and you're trying to make sure you've got representation and lack of bias and various things. The instance space is, and so that's done without knowledge of algorithm performance. That's just based in trying to design experiments to do instances to construct, to test an algorithm without knowledge of the algorithm's performance. Because the instance space looks at instance features and algorithm performance and tries to configure a space where we can learn those relationships. What we're really trying to do when we create diversity in this space is make sure that we have an understanding of where the hard instances are, the easy instances, make sure that we're filling all of that. We've also done some interesting things. Sometimes if you just grab as many instances as you can from the literature or from generators, and you throw them in the space, you see the lack of, you see the unbiasedness. You see the oversampling that sometimes we have. We have instances on top of instances. Actually, it's hard to see them. That's why we need machine learning. It's more objective than the human eye. But you don't realize that the density across the space is not even. There's actually bias there. And then when you go and do machine learning on a very unbiased set of data, you don't even realize that's what you're doing. So the instance space, we've got this other methodology that we've published a couple of years ago for an enhanced instance space analysis, where you can actually filter the instances just to make sure that not only do we have diversity across the space, but we have a kind of evenness of density so that we're not oversampling in certain regions. And then by evolving instances, we can make sure we're not undersampling in certain regions. So it's got a similar ethos to a statistical design of experiments. It's just focused on different things, like how can we visually be sure that we're not biasing and oversampling, undersampling, and that we have enough diversity. But that definition of diversity is based on the features that impact performance. So it's a little different.
Thanks, Kate.
Maybe it's just a quick one from Arindam in the audience, but the determination criteria, or what in the bin packing problem, was it like time to optimality, or was it a feasible solution? What was the?
There was a timeout. There was a maximum time, and the question was yes or no. Did the solver prove optimality within that time? Of course, it will return a solution if you have a look at the feasible solutions that explored upper and lower bounds, etc. You'll get a solution. The criteria was, could it prove optimality within the time limit? Of course, anytime you're doing this in space analysis, you can change your performance criteria, you can change your time limits, your thresholds, and the tool gives you the opportunity. User defines what good performance looks like, and you get your visualizations. You can go back in and change it if you want to explore different things. Hi, Tommaso. Question from Tommaso.
Yeah, let's jump to Tommaso's. Do you want it, Simran?
The question is there a reason that we use 10 as the default number of selected features? No, just in our experience, it seemed to go well, but you can change that number. But we like to put some default to get people started. If you have too few features, you may not need to do dimension reductionality at all. And we want to have a chance to see, how many features appear to be correlated with performance. If we have too many, then the problem becomes too hard to solve and manage. So in our experience, 10 seems good, but you can change that. Can I answer a question that hasn't been asked? I feel I regret that I didn't give more information in the talk. And it's a question that I often get asked. So I'm sure some people are wondering. I keep talking about this mathematical boundary, but I didn't say how it's actually generated. And it's such a critical thing because when we're talking about filling comprehensive instances within the boundary, and I didn't say how we actually create it, it's actually quite simple. When you have your features, every feature has an upper and a lower bound. If you think about the density of a graph, it's a number between 0 and 1. We know what those bounds are. Other features, we may know a little less about how big or small they can get, but we can take our statistical evidence from our instances and kind of estimate how big or small those numbers can get. But every feature has an upper and lower bound. So now imagine that in the high dimensional feature space, we have a bounding box. And then we just use our exact same projection algorithm to project the vertices of that bounding box into the 2D, and that's how we get our mathematical boundary. So it's quite a simple method, but I was remiss in not mentioning it.
When you're watching your own video back, you see all the things you wish you said.
And related to that was a question that I already answered for Moaz in the chat, but I think it's probably worth sharing with everybody. He was asking about the projection algorithm, and I just want to highlight that there are many choices of projection algorithm out there, many dimensionality reduction techniques, principal component analysis, TSNE, lots of stuff. We had to design our own projection algorithm because none of those share our goals. So principal component analysis, when you go from a high dimensional space to a low dimensional space, is doing so to maximize the variance retained. But that's not my goal. My goal is to create beautiful 2D maps where we can see the direction of hardness. We can see that an algorithm finds these instances easy and gets harder and harder as we go in this direction. I want to see those linear trends, those directions like you saw across the space, and the same with features. So we had to create our own dimension reduction technique that maximizes the linearity of those trends across the space so that we can visually interpret. So that's why it's customized.
Thanks, Kate. I know that we're already at time, but I wanted to sneak in one of my own questions. Has anyone tried this for MIPLib? Or I know MIPLib is so broad and it's an entire problem class, not just a problem type, but what would be like the challenges and I guess limitations there?
So your friend and colleague Simon, he had that as his PhD topic, and got a little sidetracked on some other interesting things around linear programming rather than MIP.
It's a good place to start.
It's still an open problem, and there's still a huge opportunity. And every time MIPLib sends around the call for new problems, Simon has made some contributions to that, by the way. But I think I would still love to see all of the MIPLib instances in the instance space, the evolution of them over time. Which direction are they heading in? But one of the big challenges in doing this is thinking about what are the features of MIP instances. Now we have made some progress on that, and Simon and I had a paper published this year on looking at the performance of different branching strategies in branch and bound. And so you can certainly think of features of MIPS to measure. AX less than or equal to B, properties of A, property B, correlations with objective function values, measures of symmetry, all sorts of interesting things. But it's definitely, I think, a hot topic, and I would love to see in the future a really comprehensive instance space for MIP.
Cool.
Please join us if you want to on that.
Excellent. Well, I will dive back in and say a massive thank you to Professor Smith-Miles, and thank you so much to all the attendees who joined us for today's academic webinar. Please remember to rate today's talk, and we hope to see you at the next Gurobi event. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kate.